Protesters are back on the streets of Chicago a day after video of a white police officer shooting a black teenager was released. Now, on the eve of America's Thanksgiving holiday, officials are appealing for calm. CCTV's Hendrik Sabrandi is live in Chicago with the very latest. Hendrik?
Well, good evening, Mike. It's been a very hectic evening here in downtown Chicago. We're at the corner of Wacker and Wabash, for those who are familiar with the Windy City. And just probably about 10 or 15 minutes ago, we had a huge group of protesters come right by us here, chanting. Police were kind of shadowing them the whole way, some of them on foot, a number of police also on bicycles, kind of following them, making sure things don't get too far out of hand. Probably a couple of hundred protesters are out in this part of Chicago this evening, expressing their displeasure over this particular case. All of this, as you mentioned, came to a head yesterday with two big events. First, the announcement of the indictment of the police officer Jason Van Dyke, the white police officer who shot and killed that 17-year-old man last year, 13 months ago. And then just shortly after the announcement of his arrest came the release of that dash cam video. The video very graphic, showing the officer shooting the young man, the 17-year-old Laquan, about 16 times, firing into his body as he lay on the ground. The release of that video has sparked a tremendous amount of anger and upset here in the Chicago area. That's what these protesters are concerned about. They say, why did it take so long for that video to be released? Why did it take so long for the officer to be charged? And why aren't more cases of police brutality being pursued here in Chicago? They believe the police department has a lot to account for. They have a lot of questions, and they're demanding answers from the city of Chicago tonight. Mike?
Hendrik, I want to rely on your institutional knowledge, because I remember you were in Ferguson covering that, and you saw the rage that occurred there. I know you've only been in Chicago for a short period of time, but is it palpable? Are you sensing the same sort of thing there? The similarities are there, of course. You know, a black young man killed in Ferguson at the hands of a white officer. What do you see in terms of similarities?
Well, I see a number of differences. I think the protests here are much smaller than what I saw in Ferguson last year, noticeably smaller. And of course, there's some other differences. The officer was charged with first-degree murder. The family of the victim, of the young man who was shot and killed last year, received a large payout from the city several months ago, even though the city didn't acknowledge any accountability in the case. But nevertheless, that flagrant video that was released yesterday really sparked a lot of anger. So there's a lot of stuff going on in a lot of cities around the U.S. Ferguson was one, Chicago is clearly another, where a lot of African Americans feel that police are targeting them, and what happened yesterday, they say, is just more evidence of that.
So you're seeing a difference, obviously, the differences between the two cities in terms of mood. What about police activity? Is it more subdued there in Chicago versus what you saw in Ferguson as well?
Well, I think police around the country have learned how to handle these kind of situations. They clearly believe you have to have somewhat of a hands-off policy. Let these protesters express their rage. Let them congregate in the streets as long as things don't get violent. In Ferguson, obviously, there was a lot of vandalism that went on. We haven't seen that, fortunately, in Chicago here on Thanksgiving Eve, but that's something police are definitely watching out for. So far, it's been a lot of yelling, a lot of anger on the part of protesters, but it hasn't gone further than that, fortunately.
All right, Hendrik Sabrandi, live for us there in Chicago. Thanks so much.